Welcome to Buckeyes Tomorrow Morning for Friday, April 28th. I'm your host, Tom Orr. The Indiana game is in 128 days. The game against Michigan in 212 days. The Ohio State football team right now in the middle of what is a very important weekend of recruiting, not high school recruits. Today we're talking transfer portal recruiting. Three top targets for the Buckeyes in the transfer portal this spring. They're all on campus this weekend at Ohio State. Should be a very, very interesting week in terms of potentially some sort of improvements around the fringes of the roster for this year and moving forward for the Buckeyes. Could be a pretty impactful weekend. And so we're going to bring in Tony Gerdeman of Buckeye Huddle to talk about all three of those guys. Tony, on yesterday's show, I talked a bunch with Kevin Noon about Josh Simmons, so we're going to talk about him last. But first, I want to talk about a name that might be familiar to folks who have been listening to the morning show for a few years now. Tywone Malone. He was someone who was out in New Jersey, looked like he might be a defensive line signee for Ohio State a couple of years ago, ended up going to Ole Miss instead because he wanted to play baseball. Well, just like Davis Enigmanosin, the New Jersey kid who went down to Ole Miss, now maybe going to fly back to Ohio, a little bit of a boomerang thing going there. What should people know about Tywone Malone, who is visiting Ohio State this weekend?
Yeah, big defensive tackle, like 6'4", 300 plus pounds, a guy that, as you said, Ohio State was in on throughout the recruiting process, so they know him well. He knows Ohio State, but chose Ole Miss in part because of his baseball background and wanting to play baseball, and that's not something that has been a selling point at Ohio State for about 2 decades now, I think, going strong. So that's just one of the reasons why he went there. I would also suggest that many more people should try going to Ole Miss for a year and then going and finding their eventual landing spot. But as a big defensive tackle and knowing Ohio State is kind of thin at defensive tackle right now in terms of proven players, this could really fill a need for the Buckeyes, who have 3 defensive tackles that they know they can count on and then are hoping guys progress so that they can have a 4th or a 5th or a 6th.
Yeah, Malone had 2 seasons down at Ole Miss. Last year as a redshirt freshman, 10 tackles and a sack. And, like you said, I don't think they're necessarily planning on him starting this year, but this is a spot where you kind of need more bodies. They have had guys who have not really panned out. They've had some guys transfer. So this is an opportunity to potentially kind of build out that depth chart a little bit and make it not be hero, canoe, or bust on the interior of the defensive line in terms of a 4th guy there. So the Tywone Malone, one name to know this weekend. Another name to know, this is another one that's going to sound familiar to Ohio State fans and probably a lot more familiar, and that is Lorenzo Styles Jr. He is the son of course, former Ohio State linebacker Lorenzo Styles Sr., the brother of Ohio State safety Sonny Styles, and then he ended up passing up an opportunity to come play corner for the Buckeyes, to go play wide receiver for Notre Dame. He was there for a couple of years. Now he's back in the portal. He is looking to play corner now at his next stop, and his next stop, at least this weekend, is Ohio State. Where do you think he, how likely do you think it is he ends up in this class? And, where do you think, when do you think you might see an impact from that, from him, if he does end up as a Buckeye?
Yeah, the fact that he's already talking about wanting to play defense now and move to defense full time, because that was something that Notre Dame talked to him about this spring. I think he started out as a receiver this spring and then showed up one day as a corner. Has good size, 6'1", about 195, 200 pounds. And, has 54 catches over his first 2 years, but things obviously not progressing as everyone would have liked. And so as a guy who kind of decided between cornerback at Ohio State and receiver at Notre Dame in high school, now when you take that receiver at Notre Dame portion out of it and you think, well, gosh, now where do you lean? You can go play with your brother in the same secondary, go play where your dad played and was a all Big Ten, All-American linebacker. So it sure seems like that makes great sense. And in terms of, at what point could he make an impact? I think this would be a guy that learns the position for a year, and not just learns it, but masters it, if you will, because he's played it before and he played it in high school, and he's one of these natural athletes that Ohio State saw. So, it would be one of those things you wouldn't count on him this year if he were to end up at Ohio State. Ohio State has, as we've talked about in the past, 3 or 4 corners that they can rely on right now, but those guys are getting older. And so this would be an opportunity for Lorenzo Styles maybe to sit for a year, learn, practice, soak all of this in, go against Marvin Harrison and Emeka Egbuka and Julian Fleming, these guys, and really learn what it is going to be like in the NFL, going against NFL receivers. And then next year in 2024 can compete for a job perhaps, or just be one of these guys that can get into a rotation and then go from there.
Yeah, I think that's the important piece to know here is a year after Ohio State got way down its depth chart at cornerback last year, everyone left spring in pretty good shape physically. So you've got Denzel Burke, you've got Jordan Hancock. Those guys are probably more or less locked in as starters right now, and Davison Igbinosun could be the third guy there. You got J.R. Brown there. I mean, you have the depth where you probably don't need an immediate impact guy, or Burke, Hancock, those guys both could be off to the NFL draft after this year. So you could be a year away from needing a little bit more depth there. And that's, that timetable lines up pretty neatly there, where you don't necessarily need the guy who probably needs a season to grow and develop and learn the position and learn the defense. But then by the time he's ready to contribute, that's where you're potentially in need of another guy. So that timeline seems like it lines up pretty neatly there. The third guy who will be in this weekend, someone we talked about a little bit on yesterday's show, Josh Simmons, tackle out of San Diego State. That has been sort of the number one position of need for Ohio State, I think, coming out of the spring, at least in most people's minds. Ryan Day kind of talked more or less openly about the fact that they weren't totally comfortable there. Simmons is not coming in as an all-American left tackle by any means. He was okay at right tackle for San Diego State last year. It feels like this is just, at very least, this is someone else who can be in the mix, in the rotation, fighting for that starting right tackle position, and having another body there at the very least is not a bad thing. And if you get a starter out of him, PFF graded him as a better pass blocker than run blocker last year, and that seems like that's kind of been the big concern this year for Ohio State at the right tackle position. So, he seems like someone who, again, not necessarily, you're not bringing in the 5-star all-world Justin Fields of tackles here, but it feels like he could be someone who fits a need for Ohio State this year.
Yeah, as Ryan Day has said in the past, that when they bring guys in, they like them to be starters, but that's a luxury. And right now, the Buckeyes are not in a position of luxury on the offensive line. They need guys that can come in and compete to start and possibly elevate the entire room. And Simmons, starting every game as a redshirt freshman last year at right tackle, would be able to come in and compete to solidify, or just the best of some okay options, I guess is what maybe the best way to say it right now. But he has experience which Zen Michalski and Tegra Shabola would not and do not at that right tackle spot. So I think that would be. That's one of those guys, kind of like Victor Cutler, you bring in because they're experienced, and if you can make a starter out of them, great. But even Simmons being a redshirt sophomore, he's still got time, and he's a guy that signed with San Diego State with Power 5 offers and is seen by San Diego State as a future pro. So there's some potential there, and whether that potential hits boom this summer and into, if he comes to Ohio State and hits this year or not, there is more future for him, I think, which makes him, even if he's not an initial starter, he could be an eventual starter, but also he could definitely be an initial starter.
Yeah, absolutely. And he has 3 years of eligibility remaining. So, while he was not incredible at San Diego State last year, you don't necessarily expect a second-year player to be incredible as an offensive lineman. And so with 3 years of eligibility left, yes, it could be an immediate impact thing. It could be a long-term impact thing. And this is also not a complete shot in the dark. As we talked about yesterday with Kevin, he was someone who Justin Fry recruited at UCLA, who Justin Fry, offered at UCLA. So this is someone who Justin Fry knows. Justin Fry, is not just looking at some film and hoping. So there's a little bit of an existing relationship there. So he's someone who could be someone who fits in and adds and up, ups the opportunity or ups the floor of that offensive line this fall. And that certainly is, maybe the biggest question on the offensive side of the ball is that tackle position. If you can, improve your performance there even just a little bit, that's going to have a positive impact on your win-loss record. So, Tony, I'm going to put you on the spot here. 3 guys visiting this weekend. Which of them is most likely to sign with Ohio State?
Yeah, I think I'm going to, first I will mention Tywone Malone. I just want to let you know, Tom, from his baseball background, had as many total bases this past year as tackles and was 4 of 9 at the plate with 2 home runs. So, 444, that's going to put you in the Hall of Fame. Now, you're going to need more than those 9 at bats, but not a flash in the, or maybe a flash in the pan at baseball, but is something that he could still consider, which, again, if he goes to Ohio State, then that's not going to be a part of the future. And really, it's so rare for these guys to be able to play both and to focus on both. And you remember what JT Tuimoloau, like, yeah, you can play basketball and you can play football both. And once you arrive and you see the kind of discipline and time it takes to be an Ohio State football player, or like an Ohio State football player in Georgia, Alabama, whatever, and to reach the pinnacle, you don't have time for 2 sports. And so whether or not that ends up being a factor, I still think Lorenzo Styles Jr. is my pick for most likely to end up at Ohio State. But I will say, I feel pretty good about at least a couple of these, and we'll see how the Malone visit goes, because there is an opportunity for playing time right away. And they like I said, they do. The need there is not quite as maybe significant as the need at right tackle, but I would put, in terms of need, Ohio State, the order would be Simmons, Malone, Styles. In terms of likelihood, I'd put Styles at top.
Yeah, I think maybe the more interesting way to frame this is over under 2.5 of these 3 guys signed with Ohio State.
And I think at least 2 do. I don't know enough about Malone and his decision making process right now, so I'll go this way, Tom. Ohio State doesn't generally get a lot of defensive linemen out of the South. Now, I know you're going to say he's from New Jersey, but right now he's in the South, so I'm going to say under.
All right, and most likely, Tony, to start a game for Ohio State this fall, even before we know who signed, most likely to start a game for Ohio State this fall.
I think Simmons is the answer there, and just because of the spring that we saw and the concern in Ryan Day's voice following spring. So I will say Simmons being the most likely.
I think that's probably right. I think Lorenzo Styles. Boy, I'm going to have to put $1 in the jar for that every time I do it. Lorenzo Styles Jr. probably the most likely to sign, but in a way, maybe the least likely to start a game for Ohio State this fall, because Josh Simmons, there's a clear path to the playing field. There's not a ton of depth in the interior that Ohio State defensive line. So Malone, if he goes to Ohio State, there is a clear path to the playing field there for him as well. So yeah, I think that's kind of almost an inverse order of likelihood to sign versus likelihood to start this fall, which is a little weird. But welcome to the transfer portal. It's all a little weird. We will probably end up, if the Buckeyes, they are of course over on the scholarship limit right now for whatever that's worth, which tends to be not a whole heck of a lot this time of year. So there may be more outflow through the portal. We've seen a couple names jump in there already this week. Could be some more coming in. There was another name that went into the portal on the basketball side of things. Tanner Holden, small forward, best known for hitting the game winner against Rutgers at the buzzer last December. He has re-entered the portal. He transferred to Ohio State from Wright State. He has now re-entered the portal, so he will not be part of the upcoming Ohio State basketball team. And Eugene Brown, who entered the portal a couple weeks ago, he is returning to the South. He will be playing at Georgia Southern next year. So a couple of quick basketball updates for you there as well. So we are going to be tracking all this stuff going on this weekend, these visits, how they're going, how they might impact this fall's Ohio State team. Could be a pretty consequential weekend for Ohio State as they try and sort of sand off some of the rough edges of this year's team and get themselves a little closer potentially to a Big Ten championship, college football playoff appearance, and college football national championship potentially if they can continue to improve the roster this weekend with some of those visits and through the transfer portal. We'll be following all of that at BuckeyeHuddle.com. Alex Gleitman has been absolutely killing it on all that stuff. Hey, wouldn't you know it, a guy from New Jersey, and Alex has some incredible sourcing on some of this recruiting. How about that? So if you want to know what's going on with Tywone Malone, Alex Gleitman at BuckeyeHuddle.com, the only one who's going to be the one who's probably closest to this recruitment. He also on Josh Simmons mentioned Josh Simmons as a possibility back in February. So certainly think Alex Gleitman might know what's going on there. So Lots of great coverage there on the huddle board at BuckeyeHuddle.com this weekend with all those things going on, and should be an eventful next week or so as more guys go into the portal, more guys come out of the portal, and the 2023 Ohio State football team starts to take shape. So that will do it for today. Thank you guys all for joining us. Have a great day. We'll talk to you tomorrow.